My name is Bilshan Nursimalu. I'm a partner in the dispute resolution practice at Orison Legal, and I'll have the pleasure this morning to host the panel discussions. And my co-host is Manish Ajeda, who is a colleague and fellow partner in the dispute resolution team at Orison. The panel discussion this morning is focused on developing a sustainable workforce, and we question whether that is a realistic ambition or not. Let me introduce the panelists this morning. I know, Sarvesh, you next to me, but ladies first. Jennifer Barbare is the head of business development at Great Place to Work Mauritius. Great Place to Work is an organization that provides training and consulting services to organizations, especially employers, and you provide a certification to employers based on employee surveys that you conduct during the year on their conditions of work and culture at work. So Jennifer previously worked for Great Place to Work France and has only moved to Mauritius about a month ago. So welcome to Mauritius and welcome to our panel this morning. Meenakshi Kunz is wearing two hats this morning. She's the founder and director of Hedros, a social firm that's engaged in providing consulting and business advisory services to SMEs and to startups, especially to help them to achieve sustainability in business. She's also the general manager of The Good Shop, a social enterprise. Amongst their many initiatives, The Good Shop is engaged in promoting and helping and empowering people from certain social groups to integrate the world of work. And last but not least, Sarvesh Desai is an occupational psychologist. He's the founder and director of Forward Psychology. They're involved in providing services to various organizations, including in terms of psychometric evaluation, training, recruitment, leadership, change management, and well-being at work. So let me dive straight into the subject of this panel discussion. There's an increasing interest from employers in developing conditions of work to make it more sustainable for employees. We don't want to be preaching to employers this morning. We want a realistic discussion on whether achieving these objectives is a realistic ambition or not. And hopefully this is what's going to transpire in our discussions this morning. There are four topics that we're going to cover. The first is working time autonomy. Second, managing mental health. Third, social inclusion. And last, changes in remuneration policies. So Manish, would you want to open with the first topic, working time autonomy?
First of all, the law provides that an employer who instructs a worker to work from home has to give a notice of at least 48 hours to that worker. And it does make sense to me that these 48 hours of notice be given. The worker would probably have to make physical arrangements in his home and the specific place that will be used by him to work. The place that he has in mind must be suitable and conducive for the performance of his duties. Confidentiality in its broadest sense, including data protection, would have to be guaranteed, obviously. The law also places on the employer the obligation to ensure that the place of work at home proposed by the worker himself will not only entail any risk to the safety and health of the worker himself, but also to his family members and also to other occupants of the premises. The Working from Home Regulations 2020, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, also places an obligation on the employer to conduct a suitable and sufficient assessment of the place of work of the employee at his house, at his place, to ensure that it is risk-free. Decent work is also sought by the law by ordaining employers to enter into a written work-from-home agreement. And this is set out in the format, a specific format, in the first schedule to the regulations. This is again an added protection to the worker. The same regulations additionally provide for increased remuneration for work performed during unsocial hours. Now, what are those unsocial hours? The regulations define those hours as being from a Saturday, 1 p.m., so 1 p.m. in the afternoon on Saturday, up till 6 a.m. on the Monday. So the whole of the weekend except for the Saturday morning. And those unsocial hours also include 10 p.m. on any workday, Monday to Friday, up till 6 a.m. the next day. So those are those unsocial hours. Where someone has worked during those hours, then over and above his normal pay, he will also have to be paid the equivalent of his basic rate for those unsocial hours. Expenses, very topical. Well, not surprisingly, the regulations provide that the employer has to refund to the worker the costs incurred by the latter for the use of electricity, water, telecommunications, and any other facility he has had to use at home, but also expenses incurred by the worker for the maintenance of his tools and equipment which have been remitted to him by the employer. Indeed, working from home, though having an element of cost-cutting, to be sustainable, cannot be at the expense of the worker. Bearing that in mind, I will turn to the first panelist, and here I will turn to Jennifer. Maybe Jennifer, in your view, how can employers design their work from home and flexi-time policies to avoid an interference with the employee's private life?
The first thing that you need to have in mind is the trust. Employee and employer need to have this trusted relationship before to put in place any policy or things like that. At Great Place to Work, we saw that the number of work hours in the day is not in good relationship between the productivity. You can't have long hours to have more productivity. If you have less hours in the day, maybe, I don't know, 9 or 10 to 5 or 6 p.m. in the day, you will be more productive than if you continue to work to, I don't know, 7 or 8. An employee needs to know that employer trusts them in their work, and they can take a lunch break or breaks in the day.
I will now turn to Sarvesh. Sarvesh, as a psychologist, do you consider that a policy of disconnecting after a certain time at work helps to avoid exhaustion and stress when working from home or also on flexi time? What are your views on that?
The thing to realize here is that every single one of you here, and your employees and staff and everyone, you're all supercomputers. Just like your mobile phone. 30 years ago, no mobile phones. Think about it, in your pocket. The same mobile phone, when it overworks, it heats up. How does it function? Does it work better or worse? You have glitching apps, things not working, calculations are taking time. Well, the human being is also a supercomputer. So it needs time to switch off, to recharge, in order to be able to work optimally. In the past few years, in my career, I've seen more people panic when their phones have reached 40% of battery than health reached 10%. That's the current world we live in. So when we allow the employee to disconnect, gives them more time to recharge, just to relax. You think about it, the brain, this supercomputer, best in the universe, needs time off. When you think about it, like Jennifer said, quantity doesn't mean quality. Well, the employee can relax at home, disconnect totally. Time with the family, pets, spouse, and whoever else. They can start the next day fully fit, with a fully functioning computer. Performance will be better, productivity better, morale better, mood better, happy employee, productive employee. Because we tend to see in many places employees tend to overload tasks on employees, pack the task list. At the end of the day, the employee doesn't finish everything. So they'll be like, well, what do? I have no control over my own workload. Then when they go home, it's like, you remember this app running in the background? You can't close it. It just eats away your memory. That's what happens when the worry just sets in. They can't relax all the time. They have this compulsion to check the email, check your phone, and so on. That wears away the mental capacity of the person. So when this happens over time, they get worse and worse. Then they can't just work naturally and normally. So disconnecting is a good idea, both for machines and people. So that's probably the way to go forward, but how to implement it?
As a psychologist, would you agree that work from home or flexi-time, work autonomy, time autonomy in general, may not suit every person depending on their personalities? In other words, do you think that work from home, depending on someone's personality, might work for someone who wants to, who is content to be working in their own space at work, and perhaps not for someone who performs better in a physical, collegial environment? And the reason why I'm asking the question as a lawyer is because as lawyers in dispute resolution, we're often called upon by employers when it comes to a disciplinary committee where the performance of the employee is being questioned. And do employers need to consider whether performance issues may be caused by the work environment, whether that's working from home or working in the office, whether that suits that individual employee or not?
Definitely a very pertinent question, which brings us to physical health and mental health. The difference is physical health, you cut your finger, you see the blood coming out, it's visible. Mental health is very much invisible, so we tend to ignore it. We'll leave it for the last thing we look at. It's not tangible, so we ignore it. Same as people thinking about who they are, what they are, about their strengths and weaknesses, personality traits, and so on. What we think, what we feel about ourselves, and who we are really can be different in some cases. Sometimes we want to seem like someone we are not. Social desirability. We want to seem in a certain way to get a job, which may not meet the criteria. But you think about it, many people function differently. Every single person is unique. They have their own characteristics and combinations that make them tick. So we need to evaluate properly who functions best in different contexts and places and areas. You think of the extrovert, who might want to prefer the office. They function better, they need attention, they need to talk to people, they need to be around people. But the introvert works the other way around. They like quiet time, be on their own, low noise, and so on. The working from home will favor the introvert, not the extrovert. But then again, the introvert can learn from the extrovert and vice versa, because nothing is perfect. You need good balance. You won't have just one or the other. But when people function in their own element, in their own natural setting, so to say, they tend to produce value-added contributions. When you feel at ease, your natural capacity goes beyond your 100%. But you need to find the right environment and the right setting to allow this. But you think about it, working from home is not as limited to just working at the office and working from home. Think about the cultural factor, the contextual factor. Think of Mauritius, we have this unique setting of individualistic cultures and collectivistic cultures. We have the Asian collective for the Western individual. You may have the young staff, young people, job seekers, who are looking for jobs, but who might be bound by familiar values. Can I work while my parents are at home? Can I be free of worries when the children are somewhere? You have the scarce resources going on, rising costs of life, recession in some places. These will impact mentally, emotionally, on the person. How do you mix both of them? You think about this, if you have an aging parent at home, you go to work, you're going to think, Did I leave food for them? Are they okay? What's happening to them? Are they maybe getting water and so on? You still have this background app, remember that? It's working in the background. Can you concentrate fully? Or will you be distracted? When the employee has the choice of, with working from home, they may have the employee being able to cater to both sides of their life, personal and professional, be satisfied and be at peace. Or demand that they be at the office while thinking at home. They'll be distracted and make mistakes. So nothing is perfect, but there needs to be a right balance for both types of people. And that is why you might see evaluation in recruitment, psychometric testing can reveal lots of information about how people function best. This will help the employers set up the right context and the right working system to get the best out of the employees. So it's a very dynamic environment that has no black or white answer. That depends on who's there, what you want to do, what's the objective.
We have just heard Sarvesh views on working from home, not necessarily being a solution for everyone. Aside from personalities, do you think that an employer should consider an employee's social environment when deciding whether that person can perform well at home or whether that person should be working strictly from the office space? What are your views on that?
Yes, thank you, Manish. I'll first take that question from a social enterprise perspective. We have observed that there's a paradox. We have people who have finished high school, who are computer literate, who speak very well English and French, and who aim at having a job in the service sector or the ICT, because it means generational progress for these people. But they're from vulnerable backgrounds. They've experienced poverty, etc. And these people are working, they earn a salary, but they're still struggling to pay their electricity bills. They live in small habitations with multi-generational relatives. And we have observed after the 2 lockdowns that people came to us, people who were actually dropouts of the work from home system, because they needed to go back to a more regular 9-to-5 job outside their homes and still being able to earn their lives. And we understood that it was not sufficient just to provide a laptop and an internet dongle and have people to be performant or happy to work from home or being on a flexi-time mode. Now, bringing that back to a more typical workforce profile perspective, as Sarvesh and as Jennifer and yourself, Manish, you mentioned, we're now into family models with single parents, with nuclear parents, people who don't have a village to raise their children around them. And what we have observed is it's still difficult, but people are looking for that kind of job.
Sarvesh, how should an employer deal with a worker who is showing signs of being overworked, stressed, or even having mental health disorders? How do we deal with that?
Thank you, Manish. Based on what you yourself and Jennifer were saying, as Meenakshi, the employer has a certain responsibility towards the employee. Globally, we call this the psychological contract, where the employer will give as much as possible for the employee to be able to work normally, and the employee, on the other hand, does the best to perform for the employer. It's a shared responsibility. It's not either one or the other. It's always shared. It's half and half normally. And so if the worker is being overstressed, overworked, even like you say, maybe leaning towards mental disorder, there's a certain, the employer can't just stay passive about it and just pretend nothing's happening. That's when it goes to the end and the worker just says, well, I'm out. I'm off, I can't take it anymore. But that's the reactive version. Like the OSH Act said, if I understood correctly, the employer has to be proactive to prevent disaster from happening, and there are different ways to do that. Of course, the easiest way is to have an affiliated psychologist with the company to just treat maybe staff they can talk to, someone to understand, non-judgmental, and so on. That decreases the stress and increases coping mechanisms, and they feel better. But then again, that's one option. They are also training to help people understand what stress is. Because everyone claims to be stressed. Do we actually understand what stress is? To understand the impacts, how to cope, how to manage, what to do, what not to do. Same for mental disorder. Psychology is taboo in Mauritius. I think I'm not the first person to say it. People tend to think, if you go to see a psychologist, that means you're crazy, right? Well, that's not the case. Because simply, you think about it, being sad impacts on your performance. Being tired, being down, feeling the blues. All this impacts your mental health. That's mental health. Policies, psychologists, training, sensitization, all this will definitely help. But a certain basic level support needs to be provided. Then beyond that, specialist support has to be done externally in certain cases. But there's a duty that has to be done on both sides that needs to be addressed.
The last one, changes in remuneration policies. We just wanted to explore some of the trends, some of the development in policies internationally that may not have come to into organizations in Mauritius yet, but they are raising a number of questions internationally. There is a big push globally towards pay transparency. And what is meant by that is that everyone knows what a certain job level should be remunerated for in an organization and in an industry. The European Union is currently negotiating a new directive that would force businesses, when they're advertising a job, a vacancy, to say what is the salary range, not just market rate, but what is the salary range for that job, and to ban questions on previous salaries, so on salary history, when so during interviews, because that might have an impact on what the employer then decides to offer to the employee, and also in some circumstances to require employers of a certain size to publish their stats on, to publish their gender pay gap data. This is not part of the law in Mauritius. It would be helpful to understand from you what you think of these policies. Are they, in what way do they help an employer to engage their employees more effectively?
I think transparency will help employee to have a more trusted relation with the company and to improve the feeling of fairness in the company and to avoid the feeling of favoritism in some internal promotion or external recruitment, which is always the big issue. So you hired someone from the same level of job than me, and he have a better salary. So if we have some range for the level of job, it can help for the mindset of the collaborator and help to improve the fairness.
We have since this morning been able to get a mere overview of the issues gravitating around sustainability of employment. Each field of specialization brings its own angle to any discussion that we have, and this topic is not an exception to that rule. I believe that there is never any one single right approach, or there is no wrong approach to anything that we want to look into in depth. And again, sustainability is certainly not an exception. There is no right or wrong formula either for any organization, especially not in HR. Each organization has to do some introspection to analyze its own structures, has to analyze the demographics of its own workforce, the industry, for example, in which it operates, and maybe also the agility of its processes and procedures, because to what extent work from home, flexi time can be implemented will depend on the specifics of the industry, of the enterprise. I will invite you now to warmly applaud our three panelists who have very generously given their time, knowledge, and experience to us